Hello, everybody. My name is Mārtiņš Mūrnieks, and I'm the member of the board of the Latvian Transatlantic organization, and at the same time also fully working and engaged at the Baltic Center for Media Excellence, working with the Eastern Partnership countries. And this is probably also one of the reasons why the LATO invited me for today's conversation with Iulian Groza, who is the executive director of the think tank called Institute for European Policies and Reforms, based in Chisinau in Moldova. And I think, as you can imagine, that our conversation will be mostly about Moldova and Europe, plus also anything else that Mr. Groza would like to emphasize about what's important and for Moldova at the moment. Let's probably start with a big kick question from my side, what I was thinking. And of course, it's a period when Moldova is currently in a situation between stand against between two philosophies, two approaches from people's mind to the foreign policy. It is so-called pro-European approach represented by the current President Maia Sandu, and so-called more pro-Russian approach, which was represented by the former President Igor Dodon. And could you please also tell us more about the current domestic political turbulences and developments, and then of course how that, to your opinion, Mr. Groza, would influence and impact the Moldova's European path and Moldova's development overall, please.
Thank you very much, Martins, and thank you very much for this interview. Indeed, Moldova lately, over the last month, is coming back on the European agendas, especially after the results of the presidential elections won by Maia Sandu. A pro-European, a pro-reform politician, which was voted unprecedentedly by almost 1 million citizens. There is no other politician or there is no other political party in the history of Moldova that benefited from such a large public support during the elections. And of course, that was the start of the process, and unfortunately, we're not currently at full speed in conducting the reform agenda that the President Maia Sandu has, with which the President Maia Sandu has won these elections, because of the constraints, because of the political constraints that the country is currently overpassing. Mainly because the former incumbents, or the current incumbents, because there is an acting government which is operating now for almost 3 months. That would expire on 23rd of March. And this government became acting after the former Prime Minister resigned. Mr. Kiku, together with Mr. Dodon, declared in a public conference right before the inauguration of the new president, when the President Dodon was still in power, that is accepting the resignation of Mr. Kiku. And then they declared that that was the first move to open the gate for early parliamentary elections, to reset the parliament, to start the process of cleansing the current political setup in the parliament. Over time, the positions of the socialists have changed, and not only the socialists. Actually, at that time, all political fractions in the parliament were actually asking for early parliamentary elections, and were ready to go on that, The only question was how to get into the early parliament elections, because constitution provides only two ways, whether you don't have a government in 3 months appointed, or you don't, or as a parliament, you don't legislate for 3 months. So now in the next 2 weeks, or less than 2 weeks, we will be in a position of this initial deadline expiring. However, the constitution provides that there should be at least 2 failed attempts to nominate a government. For now, we have only one attempt, one failed attempt. The Constitutional Court has declared non-constitutional the decree of the second appointment of the candidate, of Ms. Gavrilica, and called for the president and the parliamentary fractions for dialogue, for genuine negotiations in appointing a new government. Because of course the constitution does not provide solutions of how to go to early parliamentary elections. The constitution provides this, the procedure how to appoint a new government. There is no procedure in the constitution that provides how you can not appoint a government and have early parliamentary elections. So that was the call for the Constitutional Court. The president immediately after that call declared that she will not change her position, at least from that moment. She doesn't see any efficiency, any need for resuming the talks with the parliamentary fractions, especially with those who are which have politicians involved in corrupt schemes or banking fraud, like Mr. Shore, because the candidate which was appointed by a socialist party, the Dodon party, and a Shore party was the candidate that was refused by the president, especially because the fact that Shore party was part of that majority, which was declared by these two parties. And of course, following that, we got a lot of reactions from the society, from non-state actors, from academia. We also had reactions from development partners, particularly EU. Today, we have seen an interview with the US ambassador here in Moldova, again, reiterating the fact that the country needs a full-fledged government, which is voted by a parliament which represents the will of the people and represents or conducts a reform agenda, a genuine reform agenda, and addresses the corruption and reforms the judiciary. Indicating, in fact, that any government which will be supported by crook politicians in the current parliament will not get any international support, because the country is currently going through a very difficult situation in terms of, I mean, we have the political crisis, we have the economic crisis, we have social crisis, and all that, of course, is generated mainly by the pandemic situation, which is going from worse to worse every day. The authorities are not effective enough in addressing the pandemic spread. The infection rates are going up, the death rates are going up. It was only on the 2nd of March that the vaccination process started, and that was done thanks to the vaccines provided by Romania as donation and by COVAX platform, Moldova being the first country benefiting from vaccines in this context. So on taking into account all this situation, I think in the next weeks, we will be witnessing some movement in terms of the actions of the president or actions by the political parties in the parliament. The truth is that the constitution provides very clearly that in order to dissolve the parliament, to open the way to early parliamentary elections, this situation has to be established as such by the Constitutional Court. And the Constitution says very clearly, provides very clearly that you can dissolve the parliament in case you have at least 2 failed attempts to nominate a government. Now, as I said at the beginning, we have only 1 failed attempt, so probably most likely the president will be in a situation to resume talks with political fractions after her public consultations over the last week. and will be in a position to appoint a new candidate or the same candidate, depending on the negotiations they will have. And then we will see what will be the reaction of the parliament. Will that candidate be voted or not? Would be the government voted or not? In case it is not voted, then will be the situation to declare the dissolvement of the parliament, and early parliament elections will be called, and these elections may take place sometimes in June. But this scenario is less likely. Why? Because political parties in the parliament now, the majority of them, with the exception of the PAS party, Party of Action and Solidarity, the former party of the president, is calling for a salvation government, an anti-crisis government, a short-term government that has to deal with the crisis situation and with the economic situation and so on and so forth. And after 3 to 6 months to activate again the procedure of early parliament elections. But that would mean again that we will have to have dysfunctional government for 3 months or dysfunctional parliament for 3 months. So this claim that these political factions, the majority of them, socialists, Democrats, the party of former oligarch, the fugitive oligarch, Mr. Plahotniuc, the Shore Party, the pro-Moldova Party, which is led by Mr. Kandu, also a party, a partner of, political partner of Mr. Plahotniuc, and also the Party of Dignity and Truth, led by Mr. Nastasi, former partner of Maia Sandu, also calling for a government of salvation, because he was one of the candidates that was proposed by Dignity and Truth, a part of Mr. Durleșteanu, the candidate of Mr. Dodon and Mr. Shore. So PAS is in a minority in the parliament. The majority of the parliament is ready to appoint a government. The president is not ready to appoint a government because the president's agenda is very much to look for a reset of the parliament, to go for early parliament elections. The public, according to the last opinion polls, are supportive of such a statement. Unfortunately, well, that's how it works in democracy and how it works in countries where the constitution provides procedures. All political actors, all constitutional actors have to follow the procedure of the constitution. And as I said, you may have the first scenario on not appointing a government, or a very likely scenario that a new government will be appointed, a government which most likely could be supported by Socialist Party, by Shore Party, by Democratic Party, by Pro-Moldova, and Dignity and Truth Party. The option of Dignity and Truth is to have a pro-European government, which is led by Dignity and Truth candidate, Mr. Nastasi, as a minority government with support from the other parties, Socialists and Democrats and Pro-Moldova, without Shore. That is the position of Mr. Nastasi. The Socialists had today a meeting of the political executive board of the party. They also had a statement keeping the first option of the candidate, Ms. Durleșteanu, but at the same time giving some openness for other options. The leadership of socialists were not excluding that they may engage into in the talks with the Dignity and Truth Party and find a candidate which could be supported by all of them. But at the same time, as I said, and here I think I will conclude on that, the Constitution provides very clearly that the role to nominate a candidate is assigned with the President after consulting the parliamentary fractions. And there is no, no other institution can oblige the President to act in a way or another way. That's the prerogative of the President. And in case the President will not change her mind, will not appoint a candidate, or will reappoint a candidate that she already appointed, or maybe another candidate that she supports, And if that candidate is not supported, then most likely the parliamentary fractions in the parliament have two options: whether to accept that situation and to go again to the Constitutional Court, and that process will repeat, because the Constitutional Court has not provided a solution so far. The Constitutional Court only said clearly that there should be consultations between genuine consultations between president and political fractions, and there should be a second attempt appointed. Or if there is a majority, a qualified majority in the parliament, which means 2/3 of members of parliament, or 67 MPs, if there is such a number, then, and they are willing to in a way suspend the president, that can be done. I mean, by constitution, the president in Moldova can be suspended by 2/3, but that is subject to a referendum, which should take place in 30 days. If to look into the public opinion polls, most likely this referendum will fail and the president will not be suspended. But in the meantime, the issue of having a government or not will be there. Having parliamentary elections will be there. So we are in a bit of kind of a blockage, institutional blockage now. And the political actors, the president, the parliament, will have to take into account all this context and find the best suited way to get out of this blockage. It is very clear that any government should have really a pro-reform agenda if that government wants to get international development partners support, because Moldova, without macro-financial assistance from IMF or without the macro-financial assistance from the EU and other development partners, will not be able by itself to get out of this situation. Not to talk about the vaccination process and all that which is linked. So yeah, sorry for this bit long overview, but I tried to give you a feeling of where we are today. In any ways, it's uncertain what will happen, but for sure, by 23rd or 24th of March, we'll have some developments, and we all are looking forward for them.
Thank you, Iulian, for very wide and particularly in-depth insight in never easy Moldavian domestic politics we have seen in the recent and even longer years ago. May I say that actually this or another way, at least from the point of view of popularity and the public support, the current pro-reformist president wins, as the crisis with the pandemic escalates and the people are getting more tired of these political games. So that what I'm trying to say, and what I'm trying here probably to throw out is kind of the ball of the optimism. But so saying that the situation is so complicated, then it will, this or another way, turn into the favor of pro-reformists. Or I'm too optimistic.
Yeah, I'm also optimist. I've been working in government for 11 years for the Foreign Office, been part of the negotiation process of the new association agreement with the EU, part of the visa-free talks with the EU. And Moldova once was a success story of the Eastern Partnership. But then we had the billion-dollar fraud exposed in 2014-15. Then we had a number of political developments which have pushed Moldova from year to year to a more engaged rapprochement with the European Union due to the lack of real reforms in judiciary, due to the high level of impunity of the high-level political actors involved in corrupt schemes, due to inefficiency of the public institutions, independent institutions, to bring justice. And every year the country is exposed to external threats. You have more and more proxies activated and supported from Kremlin. For a while, we had even a president which was very much reporting very often to Kremlin or in Sochi, whatever, and trying to promote more that agenda. But in the meantime, as I said, every time we have been optimistic in the sense that the only way Moldova can get out of this vicious circle is by promoting clean politicians, ensuring integrity in the public institutions, ensuring more accountability in those institutions, bringing more justice, exposing all the corrupt schemes, and that hoping that that would help the broader understanding among the society that people will start to make differences between populists or crook politicians, oligarchs who, for example, or I don't know, criminals who have participated in billion-dollar fraud, becoming mayors overnight, becoming MPs overnight, having been convicted for 7 years imprisonment for banking fraud, like Mr. Shore in the first instance, and having 3 years over the last 3 years, over 56 postponements of the rulings in the Court of Appeal. All that we thought, and we believe still, that exposing that, making people become more critical, being less exposed to external propaganda and influence, Moldova society is becoming more resilient and resilient, less exposed to geopolitical clashes, because geopolitics was used for many years in Moldova like a tool to divide public society, the tool to propagate more the political interests of some political parties or individuals that were getting into power with populistic agenda, going after different schemes, rent-seeking schemes, to fund their political agenda. Also looking for external financing and all that. So in time, we thought that being more transparent, being more active, more proactive internally, that would increase the resilience with the support of also the European Union, other development partners, putting more action on conditionality. That would change things. And at the end of the day, I think the process started in 2019. When geopolitics was not the main narrative by the politicians, and all that helped the country in a way to become more resilient. And you had the elections in November, where the President Maia Sandu was won the elections not only because her pro-European agenda or pro-reform agenda, but because she has an inclusive agenda, exposing key issues that the country is fighting with, corruption, inefficient justice, and having a real pro-reform agenda. So I was really optimistic when I have seen the result, because she has been supported also by Russian-speaking communities, people who would opt for, I don't know, for pro-Russian agenda. But all these people, pro-Europeans, pro-Russians, at one day have been reflected in this almost 1 million citizens that believed in her agenda of change, of cleaning the system. And these people, also some of them who voted in 2016 for Mr. Dodon, anymore don't trust this type of agenda. So that is a triggering factor that now is supporting the pro-reform agenda of the president. The problem is that in Moldova, the president does not have executive competences or limited executive competences. And it's always good to have at least one actor which is pro-reform and start the change from that actor. And I think the president has that potential, being very rigid on her agenda and what she wants to, being also popular with the citizens. But all that may erodate in time. All this public support means a lot of expectations from the president, and the president needs to act, needs to respond to those expectations. I'm not a politologist, but I have seen in time that usually the public support is starting to decrease in about 6 months from the result you have received. So the window of opportunity to meet the expectation is quite small for the president that has no executive competences to implement that agenda. The president needs a government that is able to conduct the reform. And that is to say that the president needs a parliament majority which would be supportive of such an agenda. So if the president wants to deliver on the agenda that the citizens and the public want, this means that she needs to rely on a government and on a majority which is not corrupted, but it is really pro-reform oriented. And that is the constraint of today, because we are less than 15 days before an opportunity of calling for parliamentary elections appears, and politicians who 3 months ago were in favor of early parliamentary elections, after 3 months, they are not anymore in favor. Why? For a simple reason that their popularity is decreasing. Sure, the Socialist Party support, the Dodon support is halved in terms of the last 3 months. The public support for former party of the president, Dignity and Action and Solidarity, has doubled. The last opinion showed that almost half of the citizens would vote for PAS in early parliament elections. And only 23% would vote for socialists, about 7% would vote for Shore Party, and about 6 would vote for Renato Sati's party, which is another politician, he's the mayor of Belz, and he came third in the last presidential round in autumn. So according to the opinion poll as of today, if elections are organized, PAS has high chances to get half of the MPs in the parliament and strike an agenda for a government. And of course, parties like Democrats, former Democrats like Pro-Moldova or Dignity and Truth Party, they are not interested in early parliamentary elections. They would be interested to have this opportunity to get into government, to try to prove that they are useful and try to get back the public support. Some of them would be interested to keep the administrative resources they have developed for some time, meaning socialists, for example, or further protecting the schemes, corrupt schemes in contrabanda of cigarettes or alcohol that is seen as a source of funding for some politicians and some political agenda, because the transparency of that funding is not clearly ensured. And Socialist Party probably is the even more exposed to that, because I think it's the party which benefits from external financing, not proved in the court, but independent journalists and investigative journalists have exposed Bahamas schemes for funding the presidential campaign in 2016. In 2019, Mr. Plakhatnyuk released the video where he was handing over to Mr. Dodon a plastic bag, a kulok, full of apparently of money. At the moment when they publicly were quarreling, and that was exposed, the court, the Prosecutor General Office have not been able to investigate that, actually refused to investigate that case. that also shows you how effective are the law enforcement authorities in looking into these type of exercises. So the stakes are high, and for socialists, this is probably a survival game now. They're not so optimistic as they were in December. They actually generated this crisis with the resignation of the government. They actually called for early parliamentary elections in December. Now the socialists talk about crisis, talk about the fact that we have high infection rates, and trying to blame the president for not for that, which is obviously not true. Because the government which is there is an active government and actually was a government appointed by socialists. And they still report to the Socialist Party. For example, 1 week ago, the Speaker of the Parliament, one of the leaders of the Socialist Party, called the ministers of the government for a report and asked them to find money to cover the costs to buy the vaccines. In the more or less the same day, the National Agency, Pharmaceuticals Agency, had authorized the Sputnik V vaccine. It was not clear at that time for which purposes, but after that, it was exposed that the Sputnik V vaccine was authorized for private company to buy it and sell it and do the vaccination process for private company in Moldova. And Mr. Dodon was indicating that this type of vaccines bought by private companies should be bought in a priority manner by the government. So instead, for example, friends of Mr. Dodon to donate like EU does the vaccines to vaccinate, there is no donation coming from Russia. There is a private company which is intending to buy the Sputnik V vaccine. There is Mr. Dodon that says that the Sputnik V vaccine is the only vaccine he trusts, and that vaccine will be used. And he also was saying that if you were the president in January, the vaccination would have started and the Russian government would have provided it, and so on and so forth. And you have another, for me, it's another scheme of trying to create some intermediaries even for vaccination purposes for this type of vaccines. In the meantime, as I said, the vaccination process started with a bit of delay. It's also because the government in Moldova, the one which was led by Mr. Kiku, has not assigned proper funds for vaccines to be bought this year in the budget, which was proposed and approved by Socialists and Shore Party in December last year. It also exposed it was also exposed in December, January, that there was no vaccination plan for Moldova in the situation when in December the vaccination started in many countries in the world. It was only in January that the government has came up with a vaccination program, and the president was very much using the authority that she has and the credibility she has in order to talk to private companies, to talk to governments, to help to start the vaccination process. And it was a promise which was made in December by the president of Romania, Klaus Iohannis, that 200,000 doses will be donated for medical workers in particular. And late February, the first tranche came from Romania. In March, on the 1st of March, we had the tranche coming from COVAX last week. And on the 2nd of March, the vaccination started. Today, we have almost 7,000 medical workers vaccinated with the AstraZeneca. Also, medical workers from Transnistrian region are also vaccinated with these donations. There is no Sputnik V in Transnistria to be offered for vaccination as well. Mr. Krasnoselski, by the way, was in a very delicate situation to change his statement because apparently he did not declare that the vaccines which were used to vaccinate the medical workers in Transnistrian region was coming from the lot that Moldova benefited from Romania. He then, after that being exposed, he explained that yes, that was done from the donation brought by Romania, and he was also thankful for that. So yeah, when you look at all this, talking about optimism, it's an option. But we also need to look into the realities, and we know that there are vested interests that are not interested now generally in putting the country on the way of reform, of changes, of putting institutions in order, but they are very much triggered by their own political interests to not lose power, to not lose influence, and to maintain the scheme as much as they can, to find ways to diminish the public support for the president using heavily the media, because one have to understand that now in Moldova, the majority of the media is controlled by Mr. Dodon's affiliates. The Russian public television is retransmitted in Moldova by a local company co-owned by Mr. Furculiță, who is one of the leaders of the Socialist Party, and Mr. Chaika, the son of the former Prosecutor General of Russian Federation, which is now very popular in businesses, including in mining firms in Transnistria region, a firm which is done together with the brother of Mr. Dodon. Or Mr. Chaika and the brother of Mr. Dodon are investing in important businesses in Moscow, for example. They bought the terrain for building, which is estimated to $40 million in Moscow, for example. So all that, there are constraints. And the problem is that whether the president, without executive prerogatives, without the government, being publicly supported, having a constitution that does not provide ways how to ensure that the reset of the parliament can be done in a less harmful way, interacting with politicians which have their own interests and declare that they care for the general public interests and the need to address the pandemic situation and all that. Yeah, we should be optimists, but the problem is that we have to be also realists and try to look on the ways how the pro-reform actors in the country, be it in government, not in government, can use their effort and energy as much as they can to help the process. So it will not be easy. We don't know whether we'll have a reset of the parliament or a change of government in the next month. There is a limited possibility, unfortunately, unless the president's position is supported not only by the public, but also by political actors in the parliament, and at the end of the day, by the Constitutional Court. It has to have a ruling about the conditions of early parliamentary elections.
And the last question, I know you've been already talking to us quite a while, is how would you assess the level of engagement from the different EU actors and EU itself, and would it change more proactive role of the European Union here or other Western, also like bilateral actors? Let's say also on the platform of so-called pandemic and then COVID, so-called vaccine diplomacy, because this is absolutely the momentum also in a good term, in a good meaning, the good terms to engage.
Well, definitely what we have seen over the last month in particular, after the inauguration of the president, was that we have seen positive reactions of a momentum that many countries in Europe, and not only, also over Atlantic, have seen in this change. So there was a lot of hopes, a lot of expectations from these presidential elections. And you see that reflected also in interactions that the president has with her counterparts in different countries. I mean, lately with with the Chancellor Merkel or President Macron, or the visit of Charles Michel, the President of the European Council, to Moldova on the way to Georgia and Ukraine. So yeah, I mean, you have EU and very actively supporting Moldovan citizens. That is reflected for now even more in real by the support that our medical workers get. Our system, I mean, everything COVID-related support is coming from countries through the civil protection mechanism on the EU level or through other sources. This week we had a new lot coming from Germany. Again, medical equipment, medical everything which would be needed for the medical institutions to operate in these pandemic situations, or the big lot coming from Romania, or Lithuania was also indicating that it will provide, and other countries in the EU also do that. And also you have the support for vaccine. So vaccine diplomacy operates, works. That is now the main attention given. But at the same time, you also hear messages of support for the reform agenda of the president. Clear messages coming from development partners that Moldova needs a government, but not every government, but a government which be pro-reform and also will commit to a pro-reform agenda. Yeah, but again, our internal political situation, unfortunately, cannot be solved by our partners from outside. And that is the way how EU and our Western partners operate. Unlike our friends in the East, which from time to time try to hiddenly participate in internal processes in Moldova, including through political actors, and from time to time pointing fingers to EU and US for not interfering in internal processes in Moldova.
Well-known approach.
Yeah, and that is what is happening. So now we have seen huge support. We have seen huge potential of support that also EU has declared after the visit of the president to Brussels. EU is ready to support Moldova with macro financial support, with every technical. I mean, we also had a new 50 million euro for resilience anti-COVID grant provided by Commission, by EU lately. So yeah, the potential is there, but to value that, I mean, to get full use of this opportunity, and Moldova to get back on the path of rapprochement to EU, but at the same time of internal changes, we would need a government which would be supported by a parliament, and yeah, in a matter of years. Who knows? I'm not talking about a new success story. We don't anymore look into that, but Moldova can provide change. Moldovan pro-reform actors can provide change because people need that, and people start to be immune and more to populism and to politicians that that do not keep their promises, or are involved in different rate-seeking schemes from the state.
Well, thank you, Iulian. It's been a good talk, and lots of information for our listeners to process. And what all I can say is fingers crossed for Moldova, and so that they take the best chances. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mārtiņš.